"Elizabeth," Mr. Bennet said, "will you please join me in the study?" "Of course, father," Elizabeth replied, setting aside her needlework, standing up and shaking out her skirts. "Is something the matter, Mr. Bennet?" Mrs. Bennet asked fretfully. "No, nothing is wrong," her husband replied. "Come along, Lizzie." She did so, departing with Lydia and Kitty's giggles in her wake. Her youngest sisters seemed to find amusement in the most ridiculous of events, which was, in Elizabeth's view, a great pity. She herself liked to laugh, but not at everything and anything. She followed her father down the corridor that led to the study, which was adjacent to the library. Mr. Bennet opened the study door, and Elizabeth passed through and stopped in joyful surprise. "Uncle Gardner!" she exclaimed, and then rushed forward to embrace her favourite uncle. "Oh, what a delightful surprise this is!" She stepped back, her eyes suddenly widening in distress. "Is it Jane? Or Aunt Gardner or the children? Has something happened?" "Nothing bad has happened, Elizabeth," Mr. Gardner said immediately, and forced a smile. Elizabeth, regarding him carefully, noticed that his forehead was creased in thought. But Mr. Gardner was a truthful man, so she knew that Jane and her other relations were well. "Why are you here, sir?" she asked, taking a seat next to the fire, which was crackling pleasantly. Mr. Bennet and Mr. Gardner took seats in chairs across from her, and Gardner, after blowing out a breath, said, "Elizabeth, my dear, Madeline sent you a letter recently. Did you receive it?" "I received it yesterday," Elizabeth said, and sighed mournfully. "Mrs. Simpson is dead." "Yes, she is," Mr. Gardner agreed, and tilted his head thoughtfully. "You were grieved?" "I am. I met her in person less than a dozen times, but we had a robust correspondence for the last 8 years. She was such an interesting woman, and so kind to write regularly to a 12-year-old, as if she were quite a young lady." She sniffed and dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, and then managed a shaky smile. "Yes, I will miss her." "That explains it, at least partially," Mr. Bennet said cryptically. "Explains what?" Elizabeth asked. "It appears that you have inherited some money from the lady," her father said. "Yes, you have," her uncle said. "Yesterday I met with Mrs. Simpson's solicitor, Mr. Harris, at his request, and you are a legatee in the lady's will, as is Jane." Elizabeth's brows raised in surprise. "Truly? That seems startling, as we are not even blood relations." "Truly," Mr. Gardner said, and cleared his throat before saying, "Mrs. Simpson left you £70,000. Elizabeth froze, goggled, and finally gasped out, "What?" "Elizabeth has inherited £7,000? Mr. Bennet demanded, his usually sardonic expression replaced by open astonishment. "Elizabeth has inherited £70,000, Mr. Gardner corrected. 70,000. Elizabeth swayed a little and reached out her hands to brace herself on the arms of her chair. That is impossible,"